It started with a faint humming sound one quiet Sunday morning. I was in the backyard, trimming the hedge by my fence when I heard it, soft at first, almost like a mosquito. But as I looked up, the sound grew louder, sharper. There, floating just above my property line, was a small black drone. Its silver lens glinted in the sunlight as it hovered, perfectly still, like it was staring right at me. At first, I thought maybe it belonged to one of the kids down the street. Drones were common these days. People used them for real estate photos or weekend hobbies. But something about this one felt wrong. It didn't move around or fly off when I waved. It just stayed there, hovering directly over my garden, no more than 20 feet up. I stood there for a minute waiting for it to leave. It didn't. Finally, I called out, "Hey, whoever's flying that, knock it off," my voice echoed, but there was no response. The drone just rotated slightly, as if adjusting its camera angle, and then drifted backwards slowly before shooting straight up and out of sight. The moment it disappeared, I felt a weird chill. I went back inside, poured myself a glass of water, and told myself it was nothing, probably just a neighborhood kid showing off. Still, the image of that steady little eye in the sky stayed in my mind for the rest of the day. Later that evening, I logged onto our neighborhood app and posted a quick note asking if anyone had lost a drone. Within minutes, I got a response from the HOA president, Dales. Her message read, "No need to worry. A real estate company was surveying lots this weekend. Perfectly normal." Something about the tone bothered me. Too quick, too rehearsed. I replied asking for the company's name, but she didn't answer. Instead, a few other neighbors commented, some making jokes, some saying they'd noticed drones too. One neighbor mentioned seeing one late at night near the cul-de-sac. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me glance toward the window. Around midnight, I stepped out onto my porch just to reassure myself everything was fine. The air was still, the sky clear, and the streetlights painted soft pools of gold across the pavement. For a few moments, it was peaceful. Then I heard it again, the faint buzz like a mechanical whisper. It was back. The drone glided from behind the trees, lower this time, its red light blinking softly as it hovered above my yard again. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera, and began recording. As I zoomed in, I could see the lens tilt, adjusting toward me. I shouted, "Who are you? What do you want?" But there was no answer, only that unnerving hum. It stayed for maybe 15 seconds, long enough for my skin to prickle, then rose straight up and vanished once more into the night sky. The next morning, I replayed the video. It was blurry, but you could clearly see the drone hovering, lights blinking. I sent it to with a simple message. "This was last night. Still think it's a real estate survey." Her reply came hours later. "Please refrain from spreading misinformation. The HOA has everything under control." That phrase, "under control," stuck with me. What did that even mean? Why was my homeowners association involved with drones flying over people's yards? Over the next few days, I started noticing small changes. A car I didn't recognize began parking across the street at odd hours. My motion lights would flick on even when there was no wind. One evening, I caught a faint reflection on my window, as if something shiny was moving nearby. By Thursday, I'd had enough. I called my neighbor who'd lived here longer than I had. "You ever notice a drone around here?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yeah," he said finally. "Couple times over my pool last week. I tried to call the HOA, but they told me it was for safety inspections. Sounded strange, so I dropped it. You know how they are, don't want anyone stirring things up." That confirmed it wasn't random. The HOA really was behind this. That night, I sat in my living room with the curtains open, waiting. Around 11:00 p.m., I saw it again, hovering right above the maple tree, perfectly steady like a floating eye. I felt my pulse race. I didn't know why they were watching or what they were looking for, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to just sit back and let them. Something inside me clicked. I didn't realize it then, but that was the moment I stopped being a quiet homeowner and became something else entirely. This wasn't just about privacy anymore. This was personal. For the next few mornings, I tried convincing myself that it was over. Maybe whoever was behind the drone finally realized they were caught and decided to stop. But by the end of the week, I knew I was wrong. Friday evening, I stepped outside to take out the trash, and there it was again, hovering above the fence, silent and steady. This time, it didn't flinch when I waved or yelled. It felt almost alive, as if it had a purpose. My hands clenched around the trash bag as a strange mix of fear and anger rushed through me. I went back inside and shut the door, peeking through the blinds like a detective in my own home. I called the HOA office again the next morning. The receptionist's voice was polite but cold. Sir, we've already told you the drones are part of an approved neighborhood program for safety monitoring. They're harmless. Harmless, I snapped. It's filming people in their backyards without permission. Sir, she repeated, her tone turning firm, please avoid making assumptions. The HOA has everyone's best interest in mind. And just like that, she hung up. That afternoon, I went to see. He opened his door halfway, glancing around before letting me in. His house was dark, blinds drawn. You shouldn't keep bringing it up, he said quietly. They don't like people asking questions. I asked. He sighed, and her bored. They've been doing weird things lately. New cameras near the gate, new compliance checks. My wife said she saw them taking photos of lawns last month. Maybe they're testing some kind of tech system. That's not a system, I said, it's surveillance. Didn't respond, he just looked down like someone who'd already given up. When I left his house, I noticed the same black SUV from earlier in the week parked near the corner again. The engine was off, but I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat. As I passed, the person lowered their sun visor, hiding their face. That night, I decided to test the drone. Around 9 p.m., I set my phone to record and placed it on the patio table. Then I turned off all the lights inside my house and waited near the window. 10 minutes later, the faint hum started again. The drone drifted into view, lights blinking in rhythm, its lens pointed directly at my back door. I stepped outside slowly, pretending not to notice. My heart was pounding, but I kept my expression calm. It followed me, adjusting its height whenever I moved. Then when I suddenly turned to face it, the lens tilted sharply downward as if startled. You like spying on people, I said aloud. Tell your boss I'm done playing games. The drone jerked back a few feet, hovered, and then zipped away into the trees. When I reviewed the video later, I noticed something strange. For a split second before it fled, a logo flashed on the drone's body, a small silver emblem that looked like 3 overlapping circles. I paused the footage, zoomed in, and froze. That same logo was printed on the HOA newsletter I'd received last month. It wasn't a coincidence. The next day, I printed a few screenshots and went to the HOA office in person. Was there, perfectly composed behind her desk, wearing her usual pink blazer and tight smile. Ah, she said as I entered, mister, I was just about to email you. You've been quite vocal lately. Because you're spying on residents, I said, laying the photos on her desk. Care to explain this? She looked at the pictures, then up at me unfazed. Our drones are authorized for compliance checks. You agreed to that when you moved here. Section 12, paragraph 3. I agreed to landscaping inspections, not surveillance over my property, I shot back. Leaned forward slightly, her voice calm. We're simply maintaining order. Some homeowners forget the rules. The drones help ensure everyone's following guidelines. I stared at her stunned. So that's what this is about, lawn heights and fence colors. Her smile didn't waver. It's about protecting the neighborhood's integrity. You wouldn't understand. I left before I said something I'd regret. But as I walked back to my car, I noticed a small security camera pointing toward the parking lot, blinking red. For a second, I wondered if even this conversation had been recorded. That evening when I got home, there was a new envelope on my doorstep. No return address, just my name typed neatly on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper. In bold letters, it read, "Stop asking questions. No signature, no explanation." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a drone. Someone wanted to keep me quiet, and they were willing to go further than I ever imagined. By Saturday morning, the envelope still sat on my kitchen counter, half crumpled from how tightly I'd held it the night before. Every time I looked at it, that single sentence burned deeper into my thoughts, stop asking questions. I'd read it over a dozen times, and each time it felt more like a warning than advice. All day, I couldn't focus on anything. Every creak, every passing car, every flicker of shadow outside the blinds made me tense. It was as if my home, the one place I'd always felt safe, had turned into a glass box, and someone out there was watching every move I made. By evening, I'd had enough. If the HOA wanted to play games, I was done being their target. I decided to take control of my own peace. That night, I sat on my back porch, the air still and cool, my air rifle resting across my lap. It wasn't a real weapon, just a high-powered pellet gun I used to scare off raccoons, but it looked convincing enough. I placed a flashlight beside me and waited. The clock ticked past 11, then midnight. For once, I hoped the drone wouldn't show. But it did. At 12:17, that familiar hum broke through the silence, faint at first, then louder. My stomach tightened. The drone glided into view, hovering over the yard like it owned the sky. Its lights blinked in a perfect rhythm, steady and unafraid. I stood up slowly, keeping my eyes on it. "You came back," I murmured under my breath. The lens tilted, facing me directly. I could almost imagine watching from her computer screen somewhere, sipping tea while reviewing the footage. The thought sent a spark of anger through me. "All right," I whispered, "let's see how you like it when someone looks back." I lifted the air rifle, aimed just below the drone's body, and exhaled. The night felt impossibly still, the kind of silence that exists right before something changes. I squeezed the trigger. The pop was soft, almost disappointing. For a moment nothing happened, then the drone jerked sideways, spun, and wobbled. Smoke hissed from one of its rotors. It began to tilt, losing balance, and within seconds it spiraled downward, crashing straight into my vegetable patch with a crunch of plastic and dirt. The whole scene lasted less than 10 seconds, but my heart was pounding like I'd just run a mile. I waited, half expecting alarms or flashing lights, but nothing came. Just the sound of crickets returning to their song as if nothing had happened. I approached the wreckage carefully, flashlight in hand. The drone's body was cracked, one rotor snapped clean off. Tiny wires sparked, fading to silence. On the side, that same silver emblem, 3 overlapping circles, gleamed faintly through the dirt. I knelt beside it, half in disbelief. "Got you," I whispered. I should felt triumphant, but instead a strange unease washed over me. Destroying it might solved one problem, but now I had a bigger one. Someone was going to notice their drone was missing. I carried the wreckage into my garage, wrapped it in an old tarp, and locked the door. The hum was gone, but the silence that replaced it didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy. The next morning, I woke to a pounding on my front door. When I opened it, a bright orange notice fluttered in the wind, taped across the frame. HOA Notice of Infraction. I scanned the paper and my chest tightened. Violation, property damage and endangerment, incident reported on premises, immediate contact with HOA office required. They knew, somehow they knew. As I stood there reading, a few neighbors passed by, pretending not to look, but their glances said enough. Word had spread. Maybe they'd heard the crash. Maybe the HOA had already started their story. By noon called, her voice was calm, too calm. "Mister," she said, "I'm calling regarding an unfortunate incident involving HOA equipment." I didn't respond. "You've caused damage to community property," she continued. "We'll need you to come in and discuss restitution." "Restitution," I said. "You sent that thing over my house. That's invasion of privacy." "Please refrain from making exaggerated claims," she replied smoothly. "We were conducting a standard compliance check. You overreacted." Overreacted, the word echoed in my head long after she hung up. That night I sat on my porch again, staring at the empty sky. The air was quiet, almost too quiet. For the first time in weeks, there was no hum, no red lights, no silent watcher floating above my yard. But peace didn't come. I knew the HOA wouldn't let it end here. The notice, the phone call, the tone in its voice, it all pointed to one thing. They weren't finished with me yet. And as I locked the door that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, someone was already planning their next move. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I'd already read that orange notice at least a dozen times. Each word felt heavier than the last. Violation, endangerment, restitution. The HOA was accusing me of destroying their property, and deep down I knew exactly what that meant. They weren't angry about the drone, they were angry that I stood up to them. I decided to go to the HOA office in person to settle things face to face. I wasn't going to let them twist the story before I had a chance to speak. When I arrived, the building felt colder than usual, quiet, with that unnatural stillness that always seemed to follow wherever she went. She was already waiting behind her polished desk, her expression perfectly composed. "Mister," she greeted, her tone smooth but sharp around the edges. "I trust you've seen the notice." "I have," I said, placing the folded letter on her desk. "But before you accuse me of anything, I want to make one thing clear. That drone was over my property, not the neighborhood. It was invading my privacy." Smiled faintly. "Our drones are part of an approved safety initiative. They're used to ensure compliance with neighborhood standards." "Compliance," I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "It was hovering over my backyard in the middle of the night. You call that compliance?" She clasped her hands together. We have rules for a reason. When homeowners disregard them, order falls apart. We're simply ensuring everyone plays their part in maintaining harmony. Her calm tone made it worse. Every word felt rehearsed, polished, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. So what happens now? I asked. You find me, suspend my voting rights, what's next? Her expression hardened just a little. You'll receive an invoice for the damages, and a formal warning will be placed in your homeowner file. Further noncompliance could result in additional action. I laughed not because it was funny, but because the situation was so absurd it didn't feel real anymore. You're threatening me for protecting my own property. She didn't respond, just tilted her head, eyes cold. I left without another word, my hands shaking with anger. When I got home, the neighborhood felt different. A few neighbors who used to wave now looked away as I passed. Someone had already removed my name from the HOA group chat. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, I heard something slide under my front door. Another envelope. No logo this time, just plain white paper. I opened it slowly. Inside was a short message typed in black ink. You shouldn't have done that. The same words that had haunted me before, but this time they hit harder. Whoever was behind this wasn't just hiding behind rules and notices anymore. They were watching. I went straight to his house. He opened the door, looking nervous. You shouldn't be here, he whispered. They're already talking about you. Talking about me? I asked. He nodded, told the board you damaged association property. They're calling an emergency meeting. You're the first item on the agenda. I stared at him, an emergency meeting over a broken drone. Looked away. They say it's about setting an example. Those words sank deep. Setting an example. It wasn't about money or damage anymore, it was about control. I went home, locked my doors, and decided to dig deeper. If they wanted to make me the villain, I needed to know why. I pulled the damaged drone out from the garage, set it on my workbench, and began carefully prying it open. Inside was a small memory chip wedged near the camera. I plugged it into my laptop, expecting static or useless data. What appeared made my breath catch. Video clips, dozens of them. Backyards, porches, driveways, each labeled with street numbers from our neighborhood. The drone had been recording everyone, not just me. One video showed a family eating dinner on their patio. Another showed someone sunbathing. A third, mine, showed me standing in my yard, staring up at the sky the first time I'd seen it. I sat there frozen, scrolling through the files as realization hit. This wasn't about enforcing rules. This was surveillance. Organized, systematic, and deliberate. My phone buzzed suddenly, snapping me out of the trance. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Mister, a familiar voice said. I hope you're being reasonable tonight. It would be unfortunate if this escalated any further. I didn't speak. Sleep well, she added softly. We'll see you soon. The call ended. I stared at the drone's memory card still glowing on my laptop screen. Whatever the HOA was hiding, I now had proof, and that meant one thing: they wouldn't stop until they got it back. As I shut off the lights, I felt something shift outside. A car door closed in the distance, followed by footsteps on the pavement. Someone was out there, watching again. The hum might have stopped, but the game had just begun. The next morning, the neighborhood felt eerily quiet. Lawns still looked perfect, mailboxes spotless, and the air carried that same forced peace that had always made this place feel like a model town. But now I knew what hid beneath that picture-perfect surface: control, secrets, and fear. I couldn't stop thinking about the footage on that drone's memory chip. Dozens of private videos, all recorded without consent. Every clip was labeled and organized by address. Someone had taken the time to catalog each resident like we were test subjects. By noon, I heard from again. He texted me just 3 words: meeting tonight, 8 p.m. I knew what he meant, the emergency HOA meeting. The one where they'd make an example out of me. I replied, where? He sent back an address, not the usual HOA office, but a private residence. That night, I parked a block away and approached her house on foot. The sky was dark, and every window on her property glowed with warm light. Cars lined her driveway. I recognized several from the board members who loved to patrol the neighborhood like guards. I wasn't invited, of course, but that never stopped me before. Through the side of her property, I noticed her patio door slightly ajar. A soft murmur of voices floated out. I slipped closer, crouched near the hedge, and peeked inside. Around her dining table sat 7 people, all dressed neatly, papers and tablets spread before them. Sat at the head, posture straight, voice crisp and clear. "Let's begin," she said. "As you all know, the incident with Mr. has caused unnecessary attention. We can't allow one resident to jeopardize our progress." Progress, the word sent a chill through me. One of the men, tall, gray suit, hair slicked back, leaned forward. "Are we still going forward with the next phase?" "Of course," replied. "The monitoring program is essential. Once the rest of the neighborhood sees how effective it is, there will be no complaints." Another woman spoke up. "But he has the drone, doesn't he, if he leaks the footage?" Raised a hand. "We'll handle that. He's emotional, he'll make mistakes. And when he does, we'll make sure his actions are documented accordingly." The room nodded in silent agreement. I pressed my phone against the glass and started recording. Every word, every phrase, I wanted it all. Then something caught my eye. On the far end of the room, a screen displayed multiple live feeds, security cameras, street corners, and backyards, my backyard among them. The live image showed my own porch still empty, lights off. The timestamp updated in real time. They were still watching me even now while I crouched outside their meeting. A hand touched my shoulder. I froze. As a whisper cut through the night, "You shouldn't be here." I turned to see him standing behind me, face pale, eyes darting nervously toward the door. "You told me the time," I hissed. "Why are you helping them?" "I'm not," he said quickly. "I just wanted to warn you. They're planning to vote tonight. They want you fined, maybe even removed from the neighborhood if you don't cooperate." "Removed?" I whispered. He nodded. "They think you're trying to expose them, and honestly, you are, aren't you?" I didn't answer. Inside, I could still hear his voice. "We'll finalize the resolution tonight. Once we file the paperwork, his property access can be restricted if necessary." I felt anger building in my chest. "Restricted access," I muttered, "to my own home." Grabbed my arm. "You need to leave if they catch you." But before he could finish, the sliding door opened. Light spilled across the lawn. Stood there, expression calm, eyes sharp. "Mister," she said, her voice smooth as glass, "you weren't invited." My heart raced. "Then maybe you should stop holding secret meetings about me." The other board members appeared behind her, silent, watching. For a moment no one spoke, then smiled, a small, deliberate smile. "You've made this far more complicated than it needed to be," she said. "Why don't you come inside? Let's talk about this properly." I stepped back. "No, I've heard enough." Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read, amusement maybe. "Suit yourself," she said. "But I'd be careful about what you record. Sharing false information can have consequences." She shut the door softly, leaving me standing in the dark. Looked at me helplessly. "You should go." I did, but not before sending the recording to a private drive on my phone. If anything happened to me, I wanted someone to find it. When I got home, I locked every door and window. The neighborhood was silent again, but this time it didn't feel like peace. It felt like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for whatever came next. As I sat in the dark, I glanced out at the yard and saw a faint red light blinking near the tree line. A new drone, smaller, quieter. They hadn't stopped watching, they'd only upgraded. And now I knew this wasn't about a single homeowner. It was bigger, organized, and deliberate. And I had proof. The night after caught me outside her house. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing in that doorway, calm, confident, and utterly certain that she held all the power. It wasn't anger that kept me awake. It was fear. The kind of fear that comes from realizing the people who were supposed to protect your neighborhood had turned it into a surveillance project. By morning, I decided there was only one thing left to do: prove it. I called my friend, a tech guy I'd known since college. He worked with electronics, security systems, and the kind of digital tools that could see through secrets. When I told him what I had, a damaged drone with a memory chip full of neighborhood footage, he didn't hesitate. "Bring it over," he said, "and don't text me again about it." When I arrived at his workshop on the edge of town, he was already waiting with a soldering kit and 2 monitors glowing in the dim light. Took one look at the drone and whistled. "This isn't some hobby model. It's industrial-grade, encrypted hardware, custom firmware. You sure this came from your HOA?" "I'm sure," I said. "Their logo was stamped on it." He frowned, connecting a cable from the drone to his computer. Streams of data began scrolling across the screen. Within minutes, dozens of files appeared, video clips, spreadsheets, and something labeled resident metrics. "What's that?" I asked. Clicked it open. A grid of names filled the screen. Every homeowner in the community was listed. Next to each name were numbers, timestamps, GPS coordinates, notes like yard inspection, lighting violation, noise activity detected. He looked up at me. "They've been logging your movements," he said quietly. "Everyone." My stomach dropped. How long has this been going on? He clicked through a few folders. At least 6 months, maybe longer. There's even data synced from cloud backups. Whoever runs this system has access to live feeds. I leaned over his shoulder. "Can you trace where it's sending the footage?" He started typing furiously. After a few minutes, his screen flashed a new window, an IP address followed by a server name. He froze. "Dales," he read aloud. For a moment, I didn't breathe. It wasn't just the HOA as a group, it was her, personally. "Can you copy it all?" I asked. He nodded. "I'll make a backup, but you should know, if she's monitoring this system, she'll see someone's inside. You'll only have one shot before they wipe it." "Just do it," I said. It took nearly an hour to finish. Transferred every file to an encrypted drive and handed it to me. "Keep it somewhere safe, don't connect it to your Wi-Fi, and for the love of sanity, don't go back there tonight." I thanked him and drove home, my hands trembling the entire ride. The sky had darkened by the time I pulled into the driveway. I felt exposed, like the entire neighborhood could see what I carried. Inside, I plugged the drive into my laptop for one final check. The folders were all there, hundreds of videos, documents, and metadata files. Proof that the HOA had turned surveillance into a private obsession. Just as I was scrolling through one of the newer recordings, the screen flickered. For a second, I thought it was nothing. Then the cursor moved by itself. Files started disappearing one by one. "No, no, no," I muttered, yanking the cable out. Too late. Half the footage was gone. My heart raced. They knew. Somehow they'd tracked the connection. I slammed my laptop shut, grabbed the drive, and ran outside. The street was quiet, but a black SUV was parked near the intersection, the same one I'd seen before. Its headlights were off, engine idling softly. I stepped back into the shadows, trying to calm my breathing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text appeared from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have taken what isn't yours." I looked toward the SUV. The brake lights flashed once before it rolled down the street and disappeared around the corner. Back inside, I locked the doors and turned off every light. My reflection stared back from the dark window, pale and uneasy. I realized that this wasn't just an HOA issue anymore. Whatever had built, it went far beyond neighborhood rules. I called, whispering, "They're onto us." "Of course they are," he said. "You poked the nest. Now you need to hit back harder before they erase everything." "Hell, get the story out," he said simply. "Go public, you have enough proof, make it too big for them to hide." His words echoed long after I hung up. He was right. Keeping quiet hadn't kept me safe, it had only made me easier to control. I placed the drive inside an old metal lockbox and buried it in my backyard beneath the maple tree. The ground was cold, damp, and silent. As I stood there, a faint buzzing sound drifted through the night air. I froze. It was familiar, too familiar. When I looked up, I saw another drone hovering above, smaller than before, light blinking softly. For a moment, it stayed still, then turned and drifted away into the darkness. They were still watching. And now, I had something they desperately wanted back. I woke up the next morning with a single thought pounding in my head. I had to expose them before they erased everything. The sun filtered weakly through the blinds, casting narrow lines across my living room. Every noise felt amplified, the refrigerator's hum, the creak of the floorboards, the faint whoosh of wind outside. I couldn't tell if the paranoia was justified anymore, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't safe, not while that secret sat buried under my backyard. I spent the morning packing. Every time I stopped, I thought about her calm face and her warning voice. It would be unfortunate if this escalated any further. It had already escalated. By noon, I grabbed the shovel, dug up the lockbox, and took it inside. The drive was still intact. Words echoed in my mind, "Go public." But how? If I called the local paper, could shut the story down before it saw print. The HOA practically funded half their advertising section. Posting online might help, but anonymous claims wouldn't carry weight. I needed a bigger voice. Someone who couldn't be bought, someone who would care. That's when I thought of the Ledger Review, an independent investigative site that had once exposed a corrupt zoning board 2 towns over. They had a reputation for digging deep and publishing fast. I pulled up their contact page and found an encrypted upload portal for submissions. My hands shook as I uploaded the folder of drone footage, documents, and data had. I included a short message. This surveillance is being conducted under the guise of an HOA compliance program. Residents are unaware. The administrator is Dales. This footage was obtained legally after one of their drones crashed on my property. I hit send. Then silence. The kind of silence that sits heavy in the room, waiting to be broken. Hours passed. I kept checking my email, half expecting the HOA to burst through my door at any minute. The tension was unbearable. Finally, around 6 p.m., my phone buzzed. A new email from the Ledger Review. We've received your submission. We're verifying authenticity. If legitimate, this is a major story. Do not engage with your HOA. Stay offline. Someone will contact you soon. My breath caught, relief mixed with dread. There was no turning back now. Just as I was about to shut my laptop, a loud knock echoed through the house. 3 sharp hits. I froze. Another knock, louder this time. I peered through the peephole. 2 men in dark suits stood on my porch, not HOA security this time, but something more official looking. One of them held a clipboard. Mr. the taller one called, "We're with Neighborhood Compliance Enforcement. We'd like to speak with you about an ongoing matter." Neighborhood Compliance Enforcement. That wasn't a real department, not in any official capacity. I didn't open the door. "You'll have to leave," I said through the wood. "You're trespassing." "Sir," he said calmly, "failure to cooperate may result in further action." Their phrasing was too precise, too rehearsed. They weren't here to talk, they were here to intimidate. I stayed silent. After a tense few moments, one of them slipped an envelope under the door. "You've been formally summoned to an HOA board hearing tomorrow morning. Attendance is mandatory." Their footsteps faded. I waited another full minute before picking up the envelope. Inside was a single page with bold lettering. Final hearing 9:00 a.m. attendance required. Below that, a note written in tidy handwriting. "Bring the drone footage. Let's resolve this privately." I sat down, staring at the letter, my pulse hammering. She knew I had it. That night, I barely moved from the couch. I kept refreshing the news, waiting for the Ledger Review to post something, anything, but the site remained unchanged. I sent another message. "Please confirm you received the files safely." No response. At 2 a.m., I heard it again, that faint mechanical hum. I rushed to the window. Another drone hovered over the streetlight, turning its small camera toward my house. My chest tightened as I realized it wasn't filming, it was searching. I unplugged my router, killed the lights, and sat in the dark. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew I couldn't leave, not yet. By sunrise, I made a decision. I was going to that final hearing. Not because I wanted to resolve anything, but because I wanted to record everything. If wanted this private, I'd give her public. I packed a hidden recorder in my jacket pocket, slipped the encrypted backup drive inside my bag, and took one last look around my house. It felt strange, the calm before a storm. I didn't know if I'd be coming back, but I did know this. Once I stepped into that HOA boardroom, everything would change. Either I'd expose them for what they really were, or they'd silence me for good. And as I locked my door and walked toward my car, the morning light seemed too bright, too still, like the neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for the truth to finally surface. The morning of the hearing felt eerily quiet. The streets were still, the air heavy with that strange tension that comes before something big. I drove to the HOA office with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. In the passenger seat sat my small black bag, inside it, the encrypted drive, a hidden recorder, and a folded letter from the Ledger Review. Just before I left home, I'd received one last email from them. "Your files are, the story is scheduled for release at 10:00 a.m. Stay safe." The hearing was at 9:00. When I pulled up, the parking lot was half full. A few familiar faces from the neighborhood stood near the entrance, whispering to one another. They looked uneasy, glancing at me as I walked past. Inside, the meeting room was already set up, rows of chairs, a long table with 7 board members, and in the center, perfectly poised as always, Her bright pink blazer almost looked out of place in the sterile gray room. "Mister," she said, smiling as I entered, "thank you for joining us. We've been very concerned about your recent actions." Her tone was pleasant, but her eyes told a different story. I sat down across from her. "I received your summons," I said evenly. "You said this would resolve things privately." "It will," she replied, folding her hands neatly. "We simply need to clear up some misunderstandings about the association's property and your involvement in its destruction." One of the board members adjusted his glasses. "The footage you obtained from the drone was confidential. By tampering with it, you've violated association policy." I took a slow breath. "You mean the footage where you've been recording every homeowner in this neighborhood without their consent?" A murmur rippled through the small audience behind me. Smile never faltered. "Mister, that's quite an accusation. Our drones are used purely for safety and maintenance verification." "Then why do the files show timestamps inside people's backyards?" I countered. "Why do you have folders labeled resident metrics and noise pattern analysis? Why are you logging private activities in people's homes?" A flicker of surprise crossed one board member's face. The others stayed silent. Leaned back, her voice lowering slightly. "You've clearly misunderstood the data, but I'm afraid this discussion won't help you. You've damaged association property and accessed secure files without authorization. The board has already decided on disciplinary action." I pressed the small recorder in my pocket, the red light blinking faintly. "So you admit the data exists?" She hesitated for the briefest second before recovering. "Of course it exists. It's part of our monitoring system." That was all I needed. I stood slowly. "Thank you for confirming that on record." Her smile faded. "On record." I reached into my bag and placed the folded letter from the Ledger Review on the table. "Because in about 40 minutes, every major outlet in the state is going to know about it. The footage, the surveillance, everything. I sent them everything you've been hiding." The room went completely silent. His face drained of color. "You didn't." "I did," I said simply, "and you can't stop it. The files are backed up and they know your name." The murmurs grew louder now. One of the board members stood abruptly. "Is this true? What is he talking about?" Shot him a glare, her voice suddenly sharper. "Sit down, Robert." Then she turned back to me, her tone soft again, almost pleading. "You don't understand what you've done. This program wasn't meant to harm anyone. It's bigger than you think." "Then explain it," I said, "right now." Her eyes darted toward the window as if calculating something. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Before I could respond, the door burst open. Two HOA security officers stepped in, hands at their belts. "Ms. Dales?" one of them asked. "Remove him," she said quietly, "now." But before they could move, someone's phone buzzed loudly, then another, then another. The sound spread through the room, notifications lighting up every screen. One of the board members gasped, "It's online, it's all online." I glanced at my watch, 10:00 a.m. The story had gone live. On every device, the same headline appeared. Local HOA exposed for secret surveillance program, residents recorded without consent. Gasps and whispers filled the room. Some of the homeowners stood, demanding answers. Rose slowly, her calm exterior cracking for the first time. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," she muttered. I backed toward the door. "It's over." Her voice trembled, not with fear but with something colder. "You think this ends with a headline? You've made enemies you don't even understand." Maybe she was right. Maybe there were bigger forces behind her, companies, investors, or whoever had funded this program. But it didn't matter anymore. The truth was out. Outside, the parking lot was filled with people on their phones, reading, recording, shouting. The illusion was broken. The neighborhood, once silent and controlled, was finally awake. As I walked to my car, called, "You did it," he said. "It's everywhere, you're trending." I laughed, a shaky, disbelieving laugh that felt like the first real breath I'd taken in weeks. Back home, I stood on my porch and looked up at the sky. No drones, no hum, just quiet. For the first time in a long while, it felt like my home again. But deep down, I knew's final words weren't just a threat, they were a warning. Whatever had started here wasn't finished yet. Still, I'd won the first battle. And as the wind rustled through the trees, I whispered to myself, "Let them watch. I'm not hiding anymore." Because the truth, once exposed, can't be silenced. Not even by the HOA. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.